Alien girl let the human walk beside her through the ruins. Her final word deepened everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The air was thick with dust, and the sharp winds carried the scent of decay across the barren landscape. A broken city, once vibrant with life, now lay silent, its towering buildings reduced to rubble. Tasha, an alien girl with skin the color of emerald green, stepped carefully through the ruins, her eyes scanning the crumbled remains of a world she once knew. Her footsteps echoed in the emptiness, a reminder of the desolation that surrounded her. Beside her, a human, Tom Miller, a soldier from Earth, walked in silence, his boots kicking up clouds of ash with each step. The human had offered her his help when she had needed it most. She had been alone, abandoned by her own people, left to die in this forsaken city. But Tom had found her, a stranger in a strange land, and without hesitation, he had helped her. He had shown her kindness when the world around them was anything but kind. Tom was different from the others she had encountered. His eyes, though filled with the hardness of a warrior, held a warmth that made her believe in something more than survival. He had guided her through the ruins, offering not just protection, but also a sense of comfort in the chaos. They had traveled together for days, but today, something had shifted between them. Tasha had started to see him not just as a companion in their struggle to survive, but as someone who cared for her, someone who was willing to fight beside her, no matter the odds. She had been reluctant at first, holding on to her pride, her independence. She had always believed that vulnerability was a weakness, a trait she could not afford in a world that demanded strength at every turn. But with Tom, she had let her guard down. The journey through the ruins was long, and the silence between them was thick with unspoken words. Yet, it was in this silence that something began to change. They had shared more than just a struggle for survival. They had shared a bond. As they walked through the ruins, Tasha's mind drifted back to her people, to the world she had once known. She had been a queen, a ruler with power and influence. But now, she was nothing. Nothing but a survivor, struggling to find her place in a world that had turned its back on her. But as she walked beside Tom, something in her shifted. She realized that she had not been truly living until this moment. She had been surviving, but it was with Tom that she was truly starting to live again. Her heart, once hardened by the weight of her responsibilities and the loss of her people, began to soften. She glanced up at Tom, his face set in determination, yet there was a softness in his eyes that made her feel something she had not felt in years. It was as though, in his presence, she was no longer alone. She reached out and touched his arm, her fingers brushing against the fabric of his worn-out jacket. Tom turned to her, his brow furrowing slightly, but he did not pull away. Instead, he gave her a small smile that made her heart skip a beat. In that moment, Tasha knew that no matter what happened next, she would never be the same. She had found something worth fighting for. And as they continued to walk through the ruins, the weight of the world seemed a little lighter, and for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. But it was her final word that would deepen everything between them, a word that would forever change the course of their journey. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "You've given me more than just survival. You've given me a reason to live." Tom stopped walking, turning to face her. His eyes softened, and for a moment, there was nothing else but the two of them in the midst of the ruins. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly. "You're never going to be alone again." Tasha felt a tear slip down her cheek, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the emotion that had been building inside her. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, something that would carry them both through whatever came next. The days passed slowly as Tom and Tasha continued their journey through the ruins, the silence between them growing more comfortable with each step. The once bustling city was now nothing more than a ghost town, with remnants of what had been a thriving civilization scattered among the rubble. Tom kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, his instincts constantly alert, while Tasha seemed to grow more at ease, her shoulders no longer tensed with the weight of the past. She walked beside him, the soft rustle of her clothing the only sound besides the wind. Her steps had grown more confident, her gaze more focused, as if the darkness around her had started to lift. It wasn't just the journey that was changing her. It was Tom's presence, a steady and unwavering force that had slowly begun to weave itself into the fabric of her own resilience. There were moments when they didn't speak, simply walking side by side through the desolate streets, their thoughts their own, but somehow shared in the quiet understanding between them. It was during one of these silent moments that Tasha noticed the subtle change in Tom. He had always been strong, stoic, but now there was something different. Something softer in the way he looked at her, the way his gaze lingered just a moment longer before he turned away. It made her heart skip in a way she hadn't expected. She had never allowed herself to feel this way before. She had always been too focused on survival, on the weight of her responsibilities. But now, with Tom by her side, she felt something new, a connection, a bond that went beyond mere survival. She had told him she would never be alone again, but in truth, she had never realized how alone she truly had been until now. There were moments when she found herself wanting to reach out, to bridge the gap between them, but something held her back. She wasn't sure if it was fear or uncertainty, but she knew one thing. She was changing, and that scared her. As they approached the outskirts of the city, the ruins giving way to open fields, Tom paused, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "We'll need to be careful from here on out," he said, his voice low but steady. "The enemy patrols are more frequent in these areas." Tasha nodded, her gaze scanning the horizon. She had seen what Tom was capable of, and though she didn't want to admit it, she relied on him more than she cared to acknowledge. "I'll stay close," she replied, her voice firm. They continued on, the quiet tension between them growing as the landscape shifted. Tasha couldn't help but glance at Tom occasionally, her heart racing in her chest. She had never felt like this before, vulnerable yet safe, uncertain yet certain of one thing. She wanted to see where this journey would take them. The path ahead was unclear, and danger still loomed, but in that moment, walking beside Tom, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. And for the first time in years, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way out of this desolation together. The sky was beginning to darken as Tom and Tasha continued their journey across the open fields, the silhouette of distant mountains rising on the horizon. The wind had shifted, carrying a faint scent of rain, and the temperature dropped, making the air feel sharp against their skin. Tasha pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her emerald skin glowing faintly in the dimming light. She walked beside Tom, the quiet hum of their footsteps blending with the distant rustling of the grass. Despite the growing chill, she felt a warmth inside her, a sense of peace she had not known in a long time. Tom had been more than just a companion. He had become someone she trusted, someone she could rely on. As they neared the edge of the fields, Tasha's eyes caught a flicker of movement in the distance. It was subtle at first, a shift in the shadows, but she knew better than to ignore it. "Something's not right," she murmured, her voice steady but laced with tension. Tom immediately stopped, his hand moving to the weapon at his side. He scanned the surroundings carefully, his sharp eyes picking up on the same disturbance. "Stay close," he said softly, his tone low but commanding. Tasha nodded, her pulse quickening. They continued walking, the unease growing with each step. The quiet had returned, but now it was thick with anticipation, the kind that made every sound seem louder, every movement more significant. They passed through a small grove of trees, their trunks twisted and gnarled by time, when the sound of footsteps finally broke the stillness. A group of figures emerged from behind the trees, their dark silhouettes standing stark against the fading light. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She could tell immediately that they were not human. The figures moved with purpose, their bodies clad in armor that gleamed with an unsettling coldness. Tasha instinctively stepped closer to Tom, her body tensing. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tom's grip tightened on his weapon, his gaze hardening as he studied the approaching figures. "Not sure, but we need to keep our guard up." The figures grew closer, and Tasha could make out more details. Their skin was a deep shade of blue, their eyes glowing faintly as they fixed their gaze on her. There was no mistaking the hostility in their stare. They were not here for peace. Tasha's mind raced, but she stayed silent, trusting Tom to take the lead. The leader of the group stepped forward, a tall figure with dark blue skin and a harsh expression. "You are trespassing in the domain of the Valorians," he said, his voice deep and cold. "You will leave now, or face the consequences." Tom stood tall, his posture unwavering. "We're not looking for trouble," he said firmly, his voice calm but filled with authority. "We're just passing through." The Valorian's gaze shifted to Tasha, his eyes narrowing. "This one does not belong here," he muttered under his breath, his tone full of disdain. Tasha felt a surge of anger rise within her, but she held it in check. She was not about to let these strangers intimidate her. Tom placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "We don't want any conflict," he said, his voice steady. "We'll leave your land. Just point us in the right direction." The Valorian leader considered this for a moment, his eyes flicking between Tom and Tasha. Then, with a sneer, he nodded. "You may go for now, but know this, our patience is limited. Do not return." As the Valorians turned and retreated into the trees, Tasha let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. The tension in her body slowly began to ease, but a lingering unease remained. Tom glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" he asked softly. Tasha nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. The encounter had left her with more questions than answers. The Valorians clearly saw her as an outsider, an intruder. But she wasn't just an alien to them. She was someone they feared. For the first time since their journey began, Tasha realized that she was no longer just running from her past. She was now part of something bigger. She was part of something that could change everything. She wasn't sure what that meant yet, but with Tom by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed the Valorian encounter were marked by an uneasy silence between Tom and Tasha. They traveled together, side by side, but the weight of unspoken words seemed to hang heavy in the air. The land they crossed was vast and empty, with few signs of life. Tasha kept her eyes on the horizon, her thoughts drifting as the wind howled through the remains of ancient stone structures. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched across the barren landscape. There was something about the silence that unnerved her, a feeling that something was always just beyond their reach, waiting. Tom had noticed the change in her as well. He had always been the one to break the quiet, offering a steady stream of conversation to fill the gaps. But now, he found himself at a loss for words, unsure of what to say or how to bridge the growing divide between them. They had both been through so much, and yet, there was an unspoken barrier between them, one neither of them knew how to break. As they moved through the barren landscape, Tasha's thoughts turned inward. She had never felt more alone, even though Tom was right there beside her. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to handle anything that came her way. But now, she couldn't help but wonder if she had become too hardened, too distant. The words the Valorians had spoken echoed in her mind. "You do not belong here." It stung, not because she doubted its truth, but because it reminded her of how far she had fallen from the person she used to be. She had been a queen, a ruler of her people, and now she was nothing more than a survivor. She had let go of her crown, her title, her people. And for what? She had nothing left but the ruins and the cold, empty sky above. Tom's voice broke through her thoughts, low and steady. "We should make camp for the night." Tasha nodded, grateful for the distraction. They had been walking for hours, and the fatigue was starting to set in. They found a small clearing in the shadow of an ancient ruin, the crumbling stone providing some shelter from the wind. Tom set to work, building a fire with the limited supplies they had. Tasha sat down nearby, her mind still drifting, but now, there was something different in her thoughts. As she watched the flames flicker and dance, a strange warmth began to spread within her. It wasn't the warmth of the fire, it was something deeper. It was the warmth of being understood, of not being alone. She glanced at Tom, who was carefully adjusting the fire, his focus entirely on the task at hand. For the first time in days, she realized that, despite everything, she didn't feel so lost. There was something about Tom's quiet presence, his calm determination, that made her feel like maybe there was a way out of the darkness. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like maybe they could face it together. As the fire crackled, the night grew colder, and Tom finally sat beside her. He didn't speak at first, simply watching the flames. Then, after a long pause, he spoke, his voice soft. "You know, you're not alone in this." Tasha turned to look at him, her heart giving a small, unexpected flutter. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Instead, she simply nodded, her throat tight. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tom didn't say anything in return, but the way he looked at her told her everything she needed to know. He was here, and for now, that was enough. The morning sun rose slowly, casting a pale light over the ruins as Tom and Tasha continued their journey. The landscape before them stretched endlessly, a mix of desolation and remnants of a once thriving world. Tasha had grown accustomed to the silence that had fallen between them, but today, it felt different. There was a quiet sense of anticipation in the air, a weight that neither of them could ignore. They walked side by side, the distance between them shrinking with each passing step. Tasha had always prided herself on her independence, on being the one to carry the burden alone, but with Tom by her side, that sense of isolation was slowly fading. She hadn't realized how much she had longed for connection until now. As they reached the edge of a vast, broken city, Tom stopped, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. "We'll need to find shelter soon," he said, his voice low but clear. Tasha nodded, her eyes following his. The city before them was a labyrinth of crumbling buildings and shattered glass, the remnants of a civilization long gone. Yet, amidst the devastation, there was something oddly beautiful about it. It was as though the city was telling a story of resilience, of survival. They began walking through the ruins, each step taking them deeper into the heart of the fallen city. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was almost suffocating. The occasional sound of debris shifting underfoot was the only reminder that they were not alone in this desolate place. As they moved through the streets, Tasha's mind wandered. She thought about the life she had left behind, about the world she had once ruled. But those thoughts were fleeting, and she quickly pushed them aside. The world she knew was gone, and there was no sense in dwelling on it. She had to focus on the present, on what lay ahead. Tom's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're close," he said, pointing ahead to a collapsed building that offered some cover. Tasha followed his gaze and nodded. It wasn't much, but it would do for now. They made their way to the building, moving cautiously as they navigated the debris. The structure creaked and groaned under the weight of time, but it held firm as they entered. Inside, the air was cooler, a welcome change from the heat of the sun. They found a spot near the back of the building, and Tom began setting up a small camp. Tasha sat down, her back against the wall, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She was tired, more so than she had been in a long time. But despite the exhaustion, there was a sense of peace here, a quiet that allowed her to think. As the fire crackled to life, Tom sat beside her, his gaze thoughtful. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the distant whispers of the wind. It was in that moment that Tasha realized how much she had come to rely on Tom. He had been a constant presence, steady and unshaken. She had never allowed herself to depend on anyone before, but with him, it felt natural. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said, her words simple but full of meaning. Tom glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You don't need to thank me," he replied, his voice soft but steady. "We're in this together." Tasha's heart gave a small flutter at his words, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but with Tom by her side, it didn't feel as daunting. They sat in silence for a while longer, each lost in their thoughts, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were living, and that was enough for now. The next morning, the sun rose higher, casting its warm light over the desolate cityscape. Tom and Tasha had slept little, both too restless to truly rest, but they knew they couldn't stay in one place for too long. The world around them was unforgiving, and there were still dangers lurking in the shadows. As they packed up their small camp, Tasha couldn't help but feel a slight shift in the air, a feeling that something was about to change. Tom was quiet as usual, moving with purpose as he gathered their things. Tasha noticed the way he worked, effortlessly, methodically, and she couldn't help but admire his focus. In many ways, he was the anchor in this world of chaos, steady and unshaken. He seemed to have an unspoken understanding of the world they now inhabited, even though it was so vastly different from the one they had once known. She, on the other hand, had spent so much time ruling and managing that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply survive, to just live. But with Tom, she was beginning to remember. They set off once more, their path winding through the ruins, their feet crunching on the debris beneath them. The city around them felt eerily quiet, as if even the earth had given up on the idea of life. Tasha glanced at Tom, wondering what he was thinking. He was always so composed, but she could see the weight of the journey in his eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. It was as if the silence between them had become a language of its own, one that needed no translation. Tom finally broke the silence, his voice steady as ever. "We're getting closer," he said, pointing toward the horizon. "There's a safe house not far from here. We'll make it there before nightfall." Tasha nodded, grateful for the direction. She didn't ask how he knew. She trusted him. It wasn't just his survival skills that made her trust him. It was the way he always seemed to know exactly what to do, when to act, and when to wait. They walked on in silence, the weight of the world still heavy on their shoulders, but somehow lighter now, with each step they took together. As they moved through the empty streets, Tasha allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had never thought she would find herself in this situation, struggling to survive in a world that had once been hers to command. But here she was, walking beside Tom, learning to trust again. The fire in her heart, once fueled by duty and power, was now burning for something different. She wasn't sure what the future held, but with Tom by her side, it didn't seem as uncertain as it once had. As they reached the outskirts of the city, the landscape changed once again. The buildings gave way to a stretch of barren land, the horizon dotted with the remains of what might have once been a thriving settlement. In the distance, a small structure stood, barely visible against the backdrop of the wasteland. Tom's eyes narrowed as he scanned the area. "That's it," he said, his voice low but confident. "We'll rest there for the night." The journey had been long, and the safe house, though small and unremarkable, was a welcome sight. They approached it carefully, wary of any potential danger. The building was made of rough-hewn stone, its walls cracked and weathered from years of neglect. But it stood strong, a testament to resilience in a world that had long since forgotten the meaning of the word. Tom pushed open the creaking door, and they stepped inside. The interior was sparse but functional, with a small hearth in the corner and a few wooden chairs arranged around a table. Tasha sat down wearily, her body aching from the long trek. Tom busied himself with gathering firewood, his movements deliberate and efficient. Tasha watched him for a moment, feeling the weight of the day lift slightly as the fire began to crackle and warm the room. The flickering light cast dancing shadows on the walls, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Tasha allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. As Tom finished setting up the fire, he sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "We've come a long way," he said quietly, his voice low. Tasha nodded, her gaze meeting his. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time, she truly believed it. She wasn't alone. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The next morning, the sun rose lazily over the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the barren landscape. Tom was already up, preparing breakfast with the small rations they had left. The fire from the previous night had dwindled down to embers, but the warmth still lingered in the air. Tasha sat on the edge of the bed, her back against the wall, watching him as he moved with quiet efficiency. She was still adjusting to the constant changes, the unfamiliarity of this new life, but she had learned to find comfort in the small things. Like the way Tom always knew what to do, even when there was no plan. His presence had become a steadying force, something she never thought she'd find again. As the smell of cooked food filled the small room, Tasha's stomach growled, reminding her that it had been hours since their last meal. She stood up slowly, stretching her stiff limbs. "Smells good," she said, her voice soft but sincere. Tom glanced up, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. "It's nothing special, but it'll keep us going." He handed her a small bowl, and she accepted it gratefully. They ate in silence for a few moments, the crackling of the fire and the distant rustling of the wind their only company. Tasha looked down at her meal, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the journey ahead, about the unknowns that still lay between them and whatever future they could carve out. There was so much uncertainty, but for the first time, she didn't feel the crushing weight of it. With Tom by her side, she felt like there was a chance. She met his eyes, and for a brief moment, the weight of everything seemed to lift. They weren't alone anymore. "What now?" she asked, breaking the silence. Tom set his bowl down and stood up, brushing the dust from his clothes. "We keep moving. There's a small settlement a few days away. If we make it there, we can find supplies and maybe get some answers." Tasha nodded. She was used to thinking in terms of survival, but now she found herself considering more than just the next step. She was beginning to think about the future, something she hadn't done in so long. "All right," she said, standing up to join him. They packed their things quickly, the familiarity of the routine grounding her. As they walked out of the small shelter, the morning sun already growing warmer on their skin, Tasha took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. The world around them might be in ruins, but with each step, they were building something new, something that wasn't about the past or the battles they'd fought, but about what they could make of the future. Tom led the way as they set off, their footsteps in sync as they walked side by side. The road ahead was long, and there were still dangers, but for now, they had each other. And that, for Tasha, was enough. The days passed slowly as Tom and Tasha continued their journey toward the distant settlement, the landscape growing more barren with each step. The wind had picked up, whipping through the desolate plains, carrying with it the scent of dust and forgotten histories. They had been walking for hours, their progress steady but slow. Tasha's mind wandered. As they walked, the rhythmic sound of their footsteps offering a moment of calm in the otherwise empty world. She thought about their journey, about the uncertain path ahead. But most of all, she thought about Tom. She had never imagined that someone like him, so steadfast and unyielding, would become such an integral part of her life. There was something about him that made her feel safe, even in the face of so much danger and uncertainty. She had always been independent, always relied on herself to get through the toughest situations. But with Tom, it felt different. He wasn't just a companion. He was someone she could lean on, someone who understood her in a way no one else ever had. As they crossed a narrow bridge over a dry riverbed, Tasha paused for a moment, looking out over the vast emptiness. The land stretched out in every direction, a desolate sea of cracked earth and dust. It was hard to believe that such a place had once been full of life. The ruins they had passed through were reminders of that lost world, each crumbled building and shattered monument a testament to a civilization now gone. Tom, sensing her hesitation, turned to her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low but filled with concern. Tasha nodded, offering him a small smile. "Yeah, just thinking. About everything." Tom gave her a reassuring nod, his gaze softening. "I know. It's a lot to take in, but we'll get through this. One step at a time." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth that made her feel a little lighter. She had learned over the past few days to trust in his strength, in his ability to lead them through whatever came next. And that trust was starting to feel like something more, something she couldn't quite put into words, but something that meant more than just survival. As they resumed their journey, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren land. Tasha could feel the temperature dropping, the air growing colder with the setting sun. They needed to find shelter before the night fully set in. A few miles ahead, a faint silhouette of a building appeared against the horizon, its structure half buried in the shifting sands. Tom's eyes lit up as he spotted it. "There, that's our stop for tonight." They picked up the pace, eager to reach the shelter before it got too dark. As they approached the building, Tasha couldn't help but notice the strange sense of familiarity that washed over her. The building was old, its walls cracked and weathered, but there was something about it, something that reminded her of home. They made their way inside, finding a small, dimly lit room with a few scattered pieces of old furniture. It wasn't much, but it would do for the night. Tom immediately set to work building a fire, and Tasha took a seat by the window, gazing out at the landscape. The fire crackled to life, filling the room with warmth. The soft glow of the flames illuminated Tom's face, casting shadows that made him appear even more solid, more real than ever. Tasha watched him for a moment, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something she hadn't expected. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel completely alone. As the fire began to settle, Tom sat beside her, his eyes meeting hers. "We're doing all right," he said quietly, his voice filled with certainty. Tasha nodded, her throat tight. "Yeah, we are." She couldn't find the words to say what was in her heart, but she knew he understood. They were in this together. And that was enough. The morning came slowly, the light creeping through the cracks in the building's walls as Tom and Tasha woke from a fitful night of sleep. The fire had long since died down, leaving only the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. The cold of the early morning was biting, but they had grown accustomed to it. Tom was already up, preparing their things for the journey ahead. Tasha sat up slowly, stretching her stiff limbs, the weight of their journey pressing down on her more today than ever. She had thought that maybe, just maybe, they would find some comfort in the ruins, but every new day only reminded her of how far they were from anything that resembled home. The silence between them was comforting, but also unsettling. She had grown used to Tom's quiet presence, the way he always knew what to do, what to say. He never rushed, never pushed, and yet he was always moving forward. Tasha envied that about him. She wished she could have the same kind of certainty, the same calm, but the future felt too uncertain, too distant. As Tom finished gathering their things, he turned to her, his eyes steady. "Ready?" he asked, his voice calm, as always. Tasha nodded, though she felt anything but ready. She wasn't sure if it was the fear of the unknown or the weight of their past that made her hesitate. But she had come this far, and turning back was never an option. They stepped out into the cool morning air, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The world around them felt both familiar and strange, as though it was a memory they were only just beginning to understand. The road ahead was still long, but there was something in the way Tom walked that gave her hope. He wasn't looking back, and neither would she. Together, they would keep moving forward. As they walked through the ruins, Tasha felt the weight of their journey more acutely. Every broken building, every piece of debris scattered across the ground, reminded her of what they had lost and what they were still fighting for. She had been a queen once, surrounded by people who admired her, who looked up to her. Now, she was nothing more than a survivor, and yet, with each step, she found herself becoming more at peace with that reality. The past was gone, and all that mattered now was the present, the journey ahead. As they moved forward, Tasha glanced at Tom. His face was set in its usual expression of quiet determination, but there was something else in his eyes. It was the same quiet strength she had come to rely on, but now, there was a hint of something more, something unspoken. She wasn't sure what it was, but she could feel it, like an unspoken promise between them. They were not just surviving anymore. They were living, moving forward together. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but it didn't seem as daunting now. With Tom by her side, the future felt like it might be something worth fighting for. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of their footsteps against the cracked earth. But in the quiet, Tasha felt the bond between them growing stronger. There was no need for words. The journey, the struggles, and the shared experience were enough to build something deeper. The road ahead might be full of challenges, but for the first time in a long while, Tasha believed they could face it together.